do. The economy of Russia has been hit pretty hard.
Yes.
In fact, and this comes out just, I think, last month, it says Russia's economy contracts 11%. This is out of the Telegraph in UK, as the Putin model hits a dead end. Let's go to the click. The Kremlin's war chest is vanishing fast as the budget deficit rises to 9.4% this year. While there's still funds to cover the $80 billion of stimulus measures, the picture could turn ugly if there is a second leg to the global downturn. The World Bank says unemployment may reach 13% this year as household spending collapses. Go to the next click. Critics say the Putin years were wasted, having Russia's economy deformed. The resources curse of over-reliance on oil and gas exports pushed the ruble to an uncompetitive level, throttling what remained of Russian industry. You could kind of turn that around. You could make the same criticisms of the United States in some ways, but we're not. We're talking about Russia right now. Did they over-depend on oil?
Well, I think they did. I mean, first of all, Russia is the largest producer in the world of natural gas and the second largest producer of oil.
Oh, wow.
So they were able to ride that current of the rising price of oil, and it helped build their reserves, helped them pay off their debt. And they have been talking about modernization, but it has not happened as quickly. So yes.
Now, when you say modernization, what do you mean?
Well, modernization of their factories, of their processes. Some of their factories are very old and antiquated and are not the most efficient. They also are looking at of ways of having more green technology. How do we use technology more effectively? They're producing a superjet right now that actually has benefited from consultation from Boeing. And it's really a regional jet, and that's where you brought in the technology, the expertise of the most modern processes to help them produce products faster, better, value added.
Now, when I was a kid and watching the historical chronicles of Bullwinkle, I learned that all of the factories in Russia were all building a war machine. So those factories are not building war machine anymore, they're building toasters?
Well, many of them were building war machines, so he wasn't totally
We don't
wrong.
have any of those here.
Oh, not a few, no, not. Actually, the early 90s to the mid-90s, I think, was really a very difficult time for some of those old factory towns. I mean, there are literally towns where the only employer was a factory that did something specific, like building refrigerators or building, bombs or whatever.
Again, not unlike the United States, which had our factory towns that in our industrial revolution at the other side of it failed. Those towns failed. Right.
But there are some of those towns that have been able to build products for airplanes and that are internationally. They have come up with different ways to use their processes. So some of those factories are doing all right, but a lot of them didn't do very well. But in some ways that wasn't a bad thing, because that allowed for some innovation, small businesses, other kinds of industries to develop.
And is that happening now, or are we? I mean, we saw an economic outlook that wasn't positive, and usually people who are in poverty will do what they can to survive, and sometimes that's not the prettiest thing in the world.
No. Well, I think, first of all, Russia still has reserves. Unlike many countries, it has still money in the bank.
Oh.
They've lost a lot of that because of the crisis. At the same time, President Medvedev has just most recently said we must stop focusing on our dependence on natural resources. We must become more modern. We need to bring more innovation. There's a number of companies in there that are some of the leading software developing companies in the world. So they're wanting to diversify their economy. That is not that easy. It's certainly not that easy in a region like the Russian Far East that's not unlike us. Remember, with a time when we're heavily dependent on forestry and logging, and that was going away, and people were out of jobs. So it takes time, but I think now it certainly has gotten everyone's attention.
Is Russia, when you talk about Russia from an economic standpoint, are you talking about all of Central Asia with Kazakhstan and the stands in there, or are you talking about just Russia?
I'm talking
about
about
the map, by the way.
I'm just talking about Russia. Russia is a completely separate country. The Central Asian countries are now independent. They're part of the former Soviet Union, or what there's now an association of a common independent association of countries, but they're all independent. So when I talk about Russia, I'm speaking specifically of
Separate
Russia.
leadership, separate economies.
Absolutely.
Separate people voting or not voting or
Absolutely.
doing whatever that they would do. Okay. Well, there was an article out of the New York Times, and it's speaking about the recent Obama visit. And it says the Central and Eastern European countries issue a rare warning for the United States on Russian policy. Released 9 days after a speech in Moscow on Russian-American relations, the letter, which has gotten a public endorsement from Poland and has approval of several of the region's current leaders, makes plain an existential concern about what it regards the administration's insufficient engagement in countering a revisionist Russia. Let's go to the next click. The letter is emblematic of a widening gap. On one side, an American government whose friends fear could trade off their East European interests as a hinge for deals on Iran and nuclear disarmament, and on the other, people from an old Soviet bloc who take as an ominous matter Russia's attempts to reestablish a zone of influence along its borders. So I'm sitting here, an American citizen, and I'm really not caring a whole lot. And then all of a sudden I see this come out and I'm thinking, oh, whoa. I mean, is it Cold War all over?
No, nowhere is it Cold War. There's a couple of things that need to be taken into account. I mean, in the Central Asian area, you have different countries with different relationships with Russia. And Kazakhstan is one of those countries that has learned how to balance the relationship with Russia. They understand that they need to have a good relationship with Russia. In the Eastern European countries, I think most countries that had agreed to have the missile shield and are a little nervous now.
Missile shield? The
missile shield that the former president, the former administration wanted to place in the Czech Republic and in Poland.
Heard about that.
Yeah, you heard about that.
Yeah.
So they are a little nervous, and they probably have reasons to be concerned about how firmly are we going to stand behind that. But I would say that, first of all, Russia is not interested, from everything I can read and everything I can see, in creating or recreating the Soviet Union. What you have to appreciate is when the Soviet Union, they had networks that were dependent upon each other. The Uzbeks would grow cotton that would then be produced into clothing in Vladivostok. And so they were all interdependent. And when the Soviet Union dissolved, all of a sudden those networks broke up. And it was economically very difficult for all of the countries of the former Soviet Union. So what I think has happened is an understanding. They're neighbors, just like Canada is to us and Mexico, and we do trade with each other. Have to have a relationship. I will say that Russia is very concerned about what they call the countries in their sphere of influence, but I don't see and don't believe that they're trying to go back in and take them over.
All right. Well, typically business people know what's going on more than anything. And that's right where you are. You're in business. So let's go to some of the things that the foundation does.
Okay.
Particularly, you've got a Russian-American Pacific Partnership. Tell us about what that is.
This is a bilateral forum that we have been running now for 14 years. Be part of what you might have heard of as the Gore-Chernomyrdian Commission that was started under the Clinton administration. And this brings together business people, regional leaders, federal leaders from both countries, focusing on Eastern Siberia, Russian Far East, and West Coast. But it has slowly evolved where whoever is interested in the Russian Far East, they come from Mongolia, they come from Japan, China. We have people come from the UK, Canada, and people all over the United States who are interested in developing business relations there. Initially, this forum was sought to try to identify the barriers to trade and investment. Over the years, and we're the secretariat of this on the U.S. side, it is a way to find where are the common grounds for cooperation and what messages do we need to send to Washington and Moscow to have them make changes perhaps, or Russians are sometimes very concerned about the visa control. We've had issues with the fishing fleets coming here for retrofitting and they couldn't get visas. So there's a lot of different issues that are brought up through this forum. It is well respected by the Russian and Americans, and this next meeting we're having in September, we have a Deputy Prime Minister from the Foreign Affairs Ministry coming. We have the Ambassador to Russia coming, as well as people from D.C. So it is unique because we bring together a lot of different parties who can focus on what do we need to do to increase our cooperation in this region with the U.S. West Coast.
We're going to talk about some more of the things that you're already doing to increase cooperation. And we're talking with Carol Vipperman, who is the founder and president of the Foundation for Russian-American Economic Cooperation. It was founded 20 years ago and in 1989, and here we are in 2009, and it is going stronger than it ever has. Go to the website fraec.org, fraic.org, and you're going to learn an awful lot more.